Nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'll just give it a few moments to let a couple more people join. Okay. Shall I kick it off? You ready, Lynda?
I'm ready. Yeah, I'm just waiting. I wasn't sure if there were a few more joining, given the numbers that registered.
Yeah.
I'd just give it 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, only because the first bit frames the conversation, really.
That's true.
There's some names I recognise.
Mm. Okay. I think I'll kick off.
Okay.
Okay, well, nice to see so many of you here. Thanks for joining us. For those that don't know me, I'm Beck. I'm the marketing manager at Call of the Wild, joined by my esteemed colleague Lynda, and I'll probably introduce her shortly. But she'll be taking us through today's webinar, Breaking Free from Silent Confidence Killers. I think most of us should be aware, but if you're not, we are Call of the Wild. We deliver experiential leadership and team development programs, and we're based in the Brecon Beacons. So Lynda Campbell is one of our senior leadership coaches. She has over 10 years in senior leadership roles and specialises in cultural transformation. Lynda's worked with organisations such as British Airways and Welsh Water, and delivers impactful cultural change, customer service strategies, and leadership development. There's so much more to Lynda, but hopefully that gives you a flavour. So Lynda will be taking us through the session, but if you've got any questions, please do use the chat function. I'll be sort of support for Lynda monitoring that. And then at the end of the session, I'll share a feedback form, and be most appreciated if you could take a few moments to fill that out. So there's a lot of ground to cover in the next hour, but I will share a little bit more about this topic afterwards. And obviously, if anybody has any questions at all, either pop it in the chat or send me an email. Okay, I think that's everything. So I will hand over to you, Lynda.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Bex. Welcome, everybody. I recognise some of the names, so it's really good to see everybody today. This session really it's a conversation about whether we need to start rewriting the rules on women in leadership, but actually leadership itself. And I'll take you through some of the history and some of the background, some of the research around this. But I guess what I'm going to start with is a question, really. Has subtle conditioning shaped leadership, and therefore is it still fit for purpose? So this is a question I'd love you all to ponder on. And is it time to rewrite the rules? There's many modern day authors now who are talking about empathetic leadership, the world that we now work in, multi-generations in the workforce, and what style of leadership is required going forward. And I'll touch on some of those authors as we go through. So this webinar really is for you if you have ever held back on your ideas or your challenge, over prepared to be really heard. I'm one of those people, or have been one of those people, or even downplayed your ambition. So I want us to think about, is it time to rewrite the rules, and therefore make space for you to lead with confidence, clarity, and courage? And part of the reason I'm interested in this and have been doing quite a bit of research for Call the Wild lately is that I also I'm also a leadership coach, and many of the women, well, and men actually, but more so women that I have coached due to lack of confidence, and that really intrigues me, because when I look at what their capabilities are and their competencies are, then they're really flying. So what's going on with confidence, and is it something? Excuse me, is it something that is part of our conditioning? And I'll explore that with you. So what's going on with the confidence gap here? Women tend to underestimate their abilities, while men can overestimate. Now, this is research taken from the confidence gap by some journalists called Catty Kay and Claire Shipman. And there was a Hewlett-Packard study where men applied for roles when they thought they were 60% ready, but women seemed to wait until they're 100% ready to apply for roles. And what's interesting is confidence. It's a practice, not a personality. This isn't about our capability, it's how we're taught to see risk. So is there something in our conditioning, in our backgrounds, in terms of how women see risk and when we feel we're ready to take something on? So really, the gap we're tackling isn't about skill, it's about self-permission. We're going to do Bex is going to launch a really quick poll. And I want you to just think about this question. Have you ever held back from applying for a role or taking something on because you didn't feel 100% ready? Just a really simple yes or no. And I'll hand over to Bex for a second.
So we're at, that's almost everybody is completed now.
Fantastic.
Just a couple more. So that's nearly everybody, 37 responses. So we've got 89% there are saying yes and 11% are saying no.
So 89% of the audience said yes, they've waited.
Yep.
Until they're 100% ready. Okay, fantastic. Let me just, let's go back and share. We'll continue. Okay. So the confidence gap is what we're really talking about initially, and how do we close it? And just imagine if you were 10% more confident today than you were yesterday, what might you do? Neuroscience supports the confidence is a skill that can be built. We teach over and over again when we're teaching emotional intelligence, it's a skill that we can all develop. Even if we are lower in some areas than others on emotional intelligence, we can develop it. We just need to be aware. So confidence is a skill that can be built. But really, confidence is the things that turn thoughts into action. Because when we're not confident, we tend not to take the action, and that can cause us some issues. So success correlates more with confidence than competence. Hence, when I've been having these coaching conversations with some of the coachees that I've been working with, and I look at how high their levels of competence are, then we really are dealing with this confidence issue, and that's what the coaching then will kind of bring about. So let's just explore a little bit more insights in terms of, let me go back one. I want to just stick on this slide for a second. Let's just explore a little bit more insight, and I'm going to give you a number of little pieces of insight in terms of the confidence gap. So insight number one, confident people are more likely to be promoted even if they're less qualified. So how do we encourage ourselves to speak up and act before we're fully ready? And given the number of you that put yes, you wait till 100% until you're fully ready, then I think that's something we've got to explore. The second piece of insight is women tend to wait until they meet all the criteria, whereas men will often take risks. This is a trend. I'm not completely generalizing, by the way, but this is trend data. So again, we need to explore further how internalized doubt can hold us back. And like I said, I've been there myself, so I'm speaking from experience. So confidence is a choice. And sometimes we're going to need to make a choice to step outside our comfort zone and take a little step and be brave on something that we may not normally have done. And every time we step outside our comfort zone and we take a little step forward, we build slightly more confidence and slightly more confidence. So insight number 3, doing builds confidence. Taking action builds the confidence habit. So again, this is about habit and about how we can be consistent by consistently taking action. Confidence is learned. It's not just born. So although some of us are born and wired differently and can be more confident than others, it also is a skill that we can learn. So although confidence is partly genetic and partly learned, it's mostly forgotten by adulthood if we've absorbed the wrong messages. So it's shaped by our upbringing and our social messages. So how do we start to reframe, given that we know that some of our upbringing has framed that, how do we start to reframe our internal script? Equally, failure can build confidence. You've heard the saying, fail fast, fail often. So insight number 5, resilience builds through experience, but avoiding failure avoids confidence. When I'm teaching, when I'm working with leaders, we talk a lot around being afraid to fail and the connection with fixed and growth mindset. Often fixed mindset is afraid to fail because that leads to a confidence issue, whereas a growth mindset is not afraid to fail because it doesn't affect their confidence, because they believe they can learn more. It's that learning part of our growth mindset. So we have to redefine confidence, not as brashness or bravado or having a big ego or anything like that, but more about us having conviction, and courage to step forward and take action and do things which will start to build our confidence. I want to touch on tiara syndrome. Do you wear one? I've worn one in the past, thinking that often my efforts of getting things done and working hard is going to be recognized. So the idea of tiara syndrome was coined by Carol Frolinger and Deborah Kolb, and it refers to women waiting for recognition instead of actively seeking promotion or visibility. And think back, many of us were raised to believe that hard work will speak for itself. I certainly was. I went to an inner city school. My parents both worked in the steel industry, and it was kind of drummed into me that, get your head down, work hard, you'll get on. And to a point we do, but you also have to be visible because not everybody will see you. And this isn't about being pushy. It's just a belief that just because you might be good at something, everyone will notice. And that's not really what this is about. So we all have this inner dialogue that stops us from showing up boldly. I'll take you through a quote by Maya Angelou in a second. I've got a bit more detail on another page. But I've been doing lots and lots of research, reading lots of books, looking at lots of podcasts, thinking about my own stories, my own histories. In her book, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, she tells of a time at Facebook where women didn't sit at the main table during meetings, despite being invited. So they literally sat at the edges of the room. Why? And I have to ask myself why. And she covers this in a book and talks about, again, it being conditioning. We almost like sometimes don't see ourselves worthy. And I'll tell you my stories in a second. So just ask yourself, let's do a little bit of reflection in this conversation. Where have you been waiting to be seen instead of claiming the seat that's already yours, which is being that thing about being a little bit braver? And this is my favorite, imposter syndrome, and I have been there many times. It isn't a personal defect, it's a cultural thing. So, the term imposter syndrome was coined by psychologist Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978. But it originally, in their work, really looked at high achieving women who often felt like frauds. They may not be outwardly speaking in terms of feeling like a fraud, but their inner dialogue often was telling them. And I've certainly had my fair share of imposter syndrome. But equally, again, when I talk about the teams that I work with, the leaders that I'm working with, the coachees that I'm working with, imposter syndrome comes out loud and clear. But in a way, imposter syndrome is tied to representation. So think of it this way, and I'll tell you my story that reflects this. When you're the only woman in the room, or the youngest, or maybe the only person of colour, that feeling isn't imposter syndrome. It's a normal response to being an outsider. And are we beating ourselves up for the wrong thing? So I'll just tell you quickly 2 stories from my background, which resonate with me when I'm and why I was dead interested in this subject, because it really can hold you back. In British Gas, we had something called the top 70, which was out of 33,000 people, they had a top 70 in the whole team. And one day I got invited to that top 70, and I remember walking into the room and feeling like a fraud, and feeling like, how the hell am I here? What's my contribution? And the reason why at the time is that many of the people around the table in that top 70 were Oxford grads, were Cambridge grads. I didn't even have a degree. And it played on my mind for a long time, to the point where at 52, when I left British Gas, I went and got a master's in business and organizational psychology and nearly killed myself. 4 years of really hard study, and whilst working and setting up my own business and working as a leadership coach and trainer, all to prove myself. And guess what? I've never needed that master's in any of the work I've been doing since I left. And yes, I learned stuff. I nearly killed myself going through it. But that feeling of that imposter syndrome walking into that room, and here's the thing as well about whether it's us or whether it's the environment. I can't remember many people actually talking to me, apart from a couple, and they actually were females, that came up and talked to me. And if anybody could have seen me, they probably would have known that I was feeling out of my depth. So is it the environment? Is there something about the environment that sometimes can create imposter syndrome? My other story was when I became a member of the CBI in Wales, and I represented Centrica and British Gas as a member of a council, the CBI Council. And I walked into that room and there were 42 men, suited and booted, and 3 women. And I remember everybody's having coffee and chatted, and I stood there and I thought, well, you've got a couple of choices here. You can stick around and look like a wallflower, or you can try and mingle. And mingling, when you felt like an outsider, was the hardest thing I think I've ever done. And so again, I'm going back to environment and saying, in that environment where they were clearly introduced as a couple of new CBI members, because they let people know before the first meeting there are some new members, absolutely nobody turned around and introduced themselves or saw me standing on my own or anything like that. I had to be bold and introduce myself. And it was a real learning for me on taking that step of uncomfortableness to try and, bring myself out and out of my comfort zone. So they were 2 stories of my own kind of world. But imposter syndrome happens to us all. Alex Mann, the current CEO of Channel 4, she's spoken frequently about doubting herself daily, even as a successful CEO. Maya Angelou, I'm going to cover in a second, because I'm a huge fan of hers. She's a civil rights activist and author of 11 books, I think, and God knows how many poems. And what she talks about, what Maya Angelou talks about, is she wrote a book. Her first autobiography was from the age of 3 to 11, and she had a hell of an upbringing. Dealt with all sorts of injustice and rape and all sorts of things, racism and everything else. She spoke at Obama's inauguration. She is, let me go back, sorry. She is absolutely off the chart in terms of somebody who is well respected and has earned the right, and yet she still doubts herself. She's written 11 books. Her poem was read out at Obama's inauguration, but each time she thinks, oh, I'm going to be found out. And that is still kind of going on. So if you ask yourself when you last felt like a fraud or you weren't worthy, ask yourself what an inner friend might say to you. Because we often talk to ourselves in such a harsh way, and we're our biggest inner critic. But imagine what a friend would say to you about what you've achieved and what you might be, you can achieve. And think about that when you're actually feeling like, am I worthy and do I belong here? And the other thing to reflect on is sometimes perfectionism feeds the cycle. It's often the fuel that powers imposter feelings, because success often is defined as flawless, and anything short of that feels like a failure if we set our goals so high. How do high standards serve you? And when do they become your trap? One of the things I teach and work with clients on is DISC. Colors, Myers-Briggs. It doesn't really matter which one we're talking about. But high conscientiousness as a style has a high correlation with seeking perfection and setting really high standards for ourselves. And sometimes if you are high in that style, how can this be a strength of yours, but also how can it derail you? And therefore, when do you need to flex? When do you need to think about flexing? So there are things that we can do and we can think about ourselves. But what I want us to think about is we all should have an element of self-doubt, because we all need to keep being better and keep improving ourselves. And when we're not perfect human beings, but self-doubt is often a sign we're growing. It means you're outside your comfort zone. And I know in the last 20 years, the more I've stepped outside my comfort zone, the more I've grown. I know that is part of the work that we teach at Call of the Wild. So maybe instead of trying to eliminate self-doubt, we work with it. We use it as a signal that it's a sign of we're stretching ourselves and progress. And maybe we tell ourselves, now, it's time. I'm outside of my comfort zone. This is a good thing. So let's not doubt ourselves too much. Let me just move on. And so the other piece of background here is whether social conditioning has played a part in all of this. Carol Dweck's research, for any of you, we always work with fix and growth mindset. It's really important in the leadership work we're doing. But her research found that girls are praised for compliance, for being good, for being quiet and being compliant, whilst boys are praised for effort and assertiveness. So there is something in our background and in our conditioning that starts early and shapes confidence. As long as we know that, that's okay. As long as we recognize that, that's okay. Lisa Dahmer, who's a psychologist and author. Now, when we think about empathetic leadership going forward, that's a huge advantage in leadership. But the disadvantage, does it discourage risk-taking? So think about yourself. Think about what messages did you receive growing up about being good, being on time, being perfect, being all of those things. I remember some of them. So the other kind of piece of research I was looking at is the authority gap. What are we really talking about here? And let's talk about the stats. So the authority gap is about women being often perceived as less authoritative. And there is a disparity. It's a disparity in how seriously we take women's voices compared to men's. So here are some stats in the women, and these are recent. So women hold over 40% of FTSE 350 board seats, yet less than 10% of CEOs. So there's something there around. There is definitely progress in women on boards, and I believe in real diversity on boards. I believe that we have to have diverse thought, diverse background, diverse experiences on boards to truly represent the country and the business we work in. But there's still something not quite right in terms of only less than 10% are CEOs. So sometimes this is about being interrupted. It's about being overlooked. It could be mistaken as junior. They've been common in the research on the authority gap. And the visibility gap, which McKinsey's Lean In research did, found that women are less likely to be credited for ideas or promoted based on their potential. So there's still, and I was looking at lots of recent research, there's still lots of things around talking about this type of thing. But here's the thing on the authority gap. It's not just about confidence alone, not this piece.
Hello? Hello? Hi, Tani, you okay? Yeah. So,
Sorry, guys, can you go on mute, anybody that's just talking?
oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. But it's not about confidence alone. So the authority gap actually shows that even confident women are judged differently. So the issue here is about social perception, not personal inadequacy. And bias can play a part. Bias can play a part for us here, because the problem is it's unconscious bias, but it can be still be harmful. Even women can underestimate other women's authority. That's a bias that even we need to kind of get on top of, but again, it's unconscious. Internalized bias affects everyone. Recognizing it is the first step to changing how we behave and how we lead. So just a little reflection for you again, as you're listening to this conversation. Where might you unintentionally contribute to the authority gap in your team or culture? Just have a think if you've ever misjudged somebody. But the thing about the authority gap as well is it shows up really early again. Again, in conditioning, social conditioning, we taught boys to lead and we taught girls to please in the past. I think things are changing and they need to keep evolving. Social conditioning starts young. Women may not speak up because they've been discouraged to, from childhood. I definitely think that trend is changing. But what message did you absorb growing up about being assertive or taking charge? I can remember somebody telling me not to be bossy because I was trying to take charge of something. Equally, the one last thing I'm going to say on the authority gap, this is both cultural and economic. So the authority gap isn't just unfair, it's inefficient. When women's ideas get ignored or overlooked, organizations miss out on innovation, on diversity, and on talent retention, because everybody's ideas need to come to the table. So let's think about the identity shift, you becoming the leader that you already are. So I've said earlier, leadership identity evolves through action, not introspection. So act your way into thinking like a leader. What traits do you need to borrow from the future you? So if you're thinking about where you want to be and who you want to be, what traits do you need to borrow from the future you? And I'm not a fan of politics, right? So I'm not advocating politics here, but here's a quote from Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader who shifted from tech to politics. She describes leadership as learning to be seen and to handle judgment. So we're going back into that thing around visibility, learning to be seen. And I want to touch on courageous leadership and decision making, because I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, does courage look different in women leaders? And I'm going to share with you two, I think, outstanding leaders, women leaders who show courage in a different way. So does courage look different in women leaders? And are women, here's the question, are women more risk averse or risk aware? I think that's a great question. Women face a double bind. We can either be seen as too soft or too assertive. HBR research found that women are judged more harshly than men for the same decision. I've seen that in action. So this is a really interesting one for me about what courage looks like and what courageous leadership looks like, and what good decision making looks like. So let's just explore a little bit. The last bit the last thing I wanted to bring into this conversation, because I studied feminine leadership as a style previously, is what role does feminine leadership play? So feminine leadership is not about gender. We teach feminine leadership to all the groups we work with, but it is about leading with empathy, vulnerability, reflection, and collaboration. So what it does is it contrasts the traditional masculine leadership form of being decisive, can be dominant, and can be aggressive. In the past, I'm talking about. So that type of leadership style in the past. Jacinda Ardern, who I'm gonna showcase in a second, her quote, famous quote, "You can be empathetic and strong." And I think she showed that when she was the New Zealand Prime Minister. Mary Porter's, "Feminine traits are the superpowers we need to redesign." So there are traits the world needs more of in leadership, regardless of our gender. So let's just just look at 2 case studies for a second. And let's compare them. So let me talk about Jacinda Ardern. She was the New Zealand Prime Minister. Became, I think she might have been the youngest female prime minister in the world, but certainly in something like 150 years in New Zealand. She was one of the things that got her, that people talked about her, was her empathetic response and gun law reform from the Christchurch attacks. And I'll show you an image of her in a second, in New Zealand. How she handled the COVID crisis. There were 2 quotes, and I remember them really well. One of them by her that said, "No one will die on my watch." And the one by Boris Johnson that said, "Thousands will die. We're going to do our best to make it as the numbers as small as possible." I'm paraphrasing, but that was the difference between the style of leadership in terms of her conviction. I think it was really brave of her in 2023 because she stepped down as leader, citing her well-being, that she needed to take care of herself. That's a really brave and vulnerable thing to do. So she's known for a kindness and a bold action, and a values-based crisis leadership. Crisis leadership is the important bit there. She led crisis through her own values. And then you've got Lynda Campbell, who's the CEO of Chanel, appointed global CEO in 2022. She's really famous for the cultural shift that she's promoted at Chanel, which is about psychological safety and that everybody's voice matters. And she's known for a people-centric business transformation and values-led growth. Now, both of those ladies there, it doesn't really matter what gender they are. What it matters is what they stand for. So Lynda Campbell, some of her quotes. "It's a great time to show that the days of the superhero leader are behind us." Love that quote. "Every voice matters. If I sit in a meeting, I want to listen to every voice around the table, not just the dominant ones. That's where we bring the quiet ones who've got something to say to the fore." And people like her or her leadership style can help visibility of any gender. We can put forward a very inclusive culture, a very psychologically safe place where people are at the heart. One of the biggest pieces of work we do with leaders at the moment is all around psychological safety. And believe me, it is becoming as important in the workplace as health and safety. So how we look after our psychological needs in the workplace is becoming equally as important as how we look after our physical needs. So why does her story resonate? Well, she represents a bold shift in business leadership, where empathy and inclusion sit alongside strategy and brand performance. Her story proves that culture can be a competitive advantage and that leading with kindness is not just possible, it's powerful. And kindness doesn't mean to say that we don't have the difficult conversations. Actually, being kind means that we do, because we're helping others grow. And then Jacinda Ardern, probably somebody that I just hugely admire, and I admire her all the way through the COVID crisis, and just the fact that the way she goes about her business, very values-based. "It takes strength to be an empathetic leader," is one of her quotes. "Kindness has a power and a strength that almost nothing else on the planet has. There's no empathy without action." So it's not that she's just empathetic. She takes action on the background of her values. And you can be both empathetic and strong. So her story resonates because she's a leader. Her leadership is an accessible and inspiring model. gender neutral. It doesn't matter. It's about the style. She balanced bold policy action, so she took bold decisions. She shut her borders earlier than anyone else with deep empathy. She's very human, she's emotionally present, and she's strategic. So for me, her example invites a different kind of leadership, which is kind and courageous and not afraid to make the difficult decisions. And this is one of the most powerful images, which is when she visited the Christchurch mosque bombing, the aftermath. And that picture went around the world in terms of, as a leader of a nation, you rarely see that level of empathy. She was there, she was in it, she was with them. We all know the definition of empathy. You are feeling somebody else's pain with them. And she felt people's pain when she was there at the time. So I just think they're two really strong examples of modern day leadership. They happen to be women, but it's the style I'm talking about. It's the empathetic and courageous piece I'm talking about. So just kind of moving on and starting to summarize this webinar and this conversation, then we'll go into Q&A. Confidence is not a practice. Sorry, confidence is a practice. It's not a personality. So, you know, for those of you who studied psychology in the past, Bandura's theory of self-efficacy shows that confidence is built through experience and mastery. It's not inherited. I've talked over and over again today in that these little things where we step outside our comfort zone builds tiny bits of confidence. And that's the work I do when I'm working with leaders who lack confidence. Amy Cuddy, who's a renowned speaker on body language, she talked about confidence doesn't come first, action does. So she does a lot of work on posture and physiology and shows how behavior affects the mindset. So a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is using modern day researchers in terms of where leadership's heading, and I'll name some of them in a second. So we need to start reframing this as universal leadership evolution, not a gender one. So this isn't about women or men. This is about, where does leadership need to evolve, and is it right for where we're heading? So it's not about men. It's not about women leading more like men, and it's not about men leading more like women. It's about us evolving. So often one of the modules we talk about is in living in a VUCA world, this volatile, uncertain world, crazy world that we're living in. So in a world of burnout and generational differences in the workplace, by the way, you know, in some workplaces there's 5 generations in the workplace who all want something different off us as a leader, and fast moving change, digital, you know, evolution, all of that type of thing. Then leadership needs to be more human. That's where this is really coming to. And the three things Amy Edmondson talks about in her book, The Fearless Organization. She is one of the later researchers on psychological safety and healthy cultures. Empathy, flexibility, and psychological safety. They're not soft skills, they're strategic skills. And her work shows that psychological safety leads to better outcomes, innovation, and retention. People want to work in those type of organizations where they feel psychologically safe to speak up, to challenge, to offer ideas out. It's a really big deal. So some of the modern day leadership authors, they all agree, right? This isn't me talking, this is me doing research and working with the leaders that I work with. So this means it's not about being male or female. It's about being a coach, not a boss. It's about showing flexibility and critical thinking. And it's about having courageous conversations with care and clarity. There's a quote there by Jacob Morgan: the greatest future leaders would be the ones who explore, learn, and adapt, especially when it feels uncomfortable. So there's a few I've called out there in terms of authors we kind of use in terms of our research at the moment. Jacob Morgan's work on Future Leader talks about intentional identity. You know, we lead not just by what we do, but how people experience us. What's your identity? Liz Wiseman's work on Impact Player, and she's also got another book out called Multiplier. It's about us stepping in, stepping up, doing what's needed, so we get noticed by landing impact. Brené Brown's book on Dare to Lead, you know, Simon Sinek on Leaders Eat Last. They're all supporting this psychologically safe environment where you create the right environment for people to grow. Kim Scott, and I'm a huge fan of her work on Radical Candor, which is caring deeply but challenging directly. So ask yourself, what's your current leadership brand? What would people say about you when you're not in the room? But what would you want them to say? Because this isn't about you becoming someone else. This is about you becoming more of you, more visible, more clear, more you, more your style. Ooh, let me go back one, sorry, skip one. And just a little thing on visibility, right? Because often people think, I can't push myself, you know, all over the place. That's going to look egotistical. There are things you can do. Being visible definitely helps. Create a visibility plan. Who needs to know about the work you're doing? You know, how will they find out? Because you don't just get noticed. Dial up your authentic influence. Where do you already have trust and credibility, and how can you exploit that? And close your visibility gap. Where could you use your voice more strategically, not just more often? You know, think about some topics that are going on in your workplace, and think about how you could add to that conversation. Do a little bit of your own research. You know, come to the table. If you want a little courage and confidence toolkit, then there are little things we can do. Confidence Ladder is all about building small wins. I've talked about that many times. Reframe your thoughts. We do a lot of work on reframing. Reframe your thoughts. Change it from I'm not ready to I'm preparing. I'm having a go. I'll learn. Bold asking. Make a small courageous ask weekly. You know, celebrate what's working. Practice, 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 practice courageous conversations, which is where you care personally and challenge directly. The whole piece from Kim Scott on Radical Candor. Become a good storyteller. Tell your story. Ask one bold question in a meeting, or seek out a sponsor, somebody who can help you, or a mentor, a really good mentor. So just to wind up, let's be brave, not perfect. Your doubts aren't your defects. They're data points that show you care. You get to lead anyway. You're all leaders. So just be a bit braver, not always perfect. And this isn't about gender. It's about how we show up with empathy, care, and flexibility in the world that we are now working in. And if you read people like Jacob Morgan's The Future Leader, he talks about the 5 generations in the workforce and all needing something different from us as a leader. So how we show up and how we lead for the next 10 and 20 years. My leadership career is, you know, come to an end, and I'm kind of working with lots of leaders. But what I'm really interested in is how we can build the future leaders of the next 10 to 20 years through this kind of evolution. So I'm going to stop sharing and offer it up to any questions or any thoughts. Anybody have anything?
One of the things I was going to ask is some starting points. So that toolkit actually was really helpful to see. I think if it's okay, I'll at least share that, if not the slides, with people afterwards, because I think that's really important. And what was really powerful to me was the confidence is a practice. That's such a like powerful thing to remember when you're in situations when you don't feel like it. To practice, it's important to push yourself when you don't necessarily want to.
And it's the big thing about stepping outside your comfort zone. Every time you step outside your comfort zone, you're practicing, and a little bit more courage and confidence will build, and competence.
Yeah. Danielle, you've got your hand raised there. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. That was brilliant. And when you said about walking into the room and then going off and killing yourself to get a master's because you didn't feel, and as somebody who's just finished 2 and nearly killed herself doing that for the same reason, I did cry at that point.
I know.
But thank you for sharing that story. I think the big bit that I took from it for me was the you know, when you doubt yourself, and that it's a growth thing, and actually going outside your comfort zone is important for growth.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, because I do that a lot. My partner says I'm always, you know, I go through a cycle where every 2 or 3 months everything's great, and then all of a sudden I can't do anything, I'm useless, I can't do it. But to know that that's normal, and to not worry about that was really helpful. Thank you.
And even you joining this session, and you know, even speaking up, being the first to ask a question, you're stepping outside your comfort zone already.
Yeah.
Well done. You. That's okay.
Yeah, I will. There's been a couple of comments saying people would like to see slides and recording. So the recording will be available afterwards. And yeah, I'll. It might not be today, but I'll definitely share that with you.
And you know, and the whole work we do around women in leadership. You know, if you guys want support in that way, then we one of the pieces of work we do is, and really, I think this benefits more from being an open type of course, is we do a women in leadership course trying to help you through all of these things we talked about. This is a snapshot of what we go through and deal with, and it's taken from research and experience. Yeah, there's an offer in there for you guys.
Yeah, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. So thanks for that. Lynda has put together a really fantastic program. I'll you know, upsell it, because it's a great program, all sort of feeding off of a lot of what she's talked about today, but obviously developed further. So it's an online program, building these confidence skills. It's creating a network and a supportive space to empower women in their own leadership style to thrive. So I think does anybody have any more questions? This is a great opportunity to practice confidence.
I'm seeing some of the chat actually.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I could.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah, please fire away.
Do you think a lot of your confidence has been built with your age and experience? Because I feel, as I've excelled through my career at quite a young age, I feel that maybe has hindered where people would maybe disregard me quite a lot. Kind of being in my mid-30s now, I feel that's probably played a lot in my past, where I've kind of been disregarded due to being quite young. But having worked in, you know, my sector for nearly 15 years now, it's not that I don't have the knowledge or the experience, but sometimes excelling too quickly almost feels like it threatens other people, and that leads them to kind of almost try and break your confidence, like almost you shouldn't be this confident or capable at such a young age. So they almost disregard it.
But again, you're almost talking about, number one, conditioned. You know, we're almost conditioned to feel like that, because you shouldn't be feeling like that, because all power to you in terms of the work that you've done to get where you've got to. I wish I knew what I know now when I was your age. Yes, some of this has come from age and experience, but it's also come from being interested in this subject and doing a lot more research in it, and understanding more, you know, those little things, or those little hacks about, you know, stepping outside your comfort zone and building one more thing and being a little bit more confident. I wish I'd known that then, because I think you would overcome some of the way you're thinking, but by doing those things. Do you see what I mean? And the other thing is, it's the environment. You know, imposter syndrome isn't about us. It's not about you, and it's about the environment. And it's the environment that needs to change. We should be celebrating, you know, women or men like you who are making it at a young age, and you know, and through their competence, through their delivery, through their action, through everything else. So it's still interesting that you feel in this society, you know, today's society, that you still feel that way. There's still a way to go, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think especially this generation now, like we've kind of grown up able to be that bit more vulnerable, you know, lots of kind of self-help and all of that in this kind of era. And as much as I can do that and apply that in every other aspect of my life, I still feel I struggle to do it in a work environment.
Yeah, well, isn't that strange? So is it you, or is it the environment? That's what I come back to. But we can, you know, let's be honest, collectively we can help change environments. You know, the more that we all buy into psychological safety, you know, empathy, empathetic leadership, all of that, the more that we can all use that as a bit of a movement. Like I said, that's not that's any gender. I think we can try and subtly change over time those environments.
Yeah, thank you guys, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the question, well done.
So I've popped the link to the feedback form in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind taking a second to fill that in, that would be great. It really helps inform where we take these webinars. We're trying to run them sort of every 6 weeks, and we're seeing they're sort of growing, which is great to see. But obviously we want them to be useful and relevant. And then I've popped the link to our Women in Leadership program in the chat as well, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So I'll pop my email in there as well if you did have any questions. And then unless anybody has any more questions for Lynda, the last bit of admin from me is just to let you know that we've got another webinar coming up in October. So that's going to be with Dr. Barry Kennard again, and that's on the 24th, and that's about the where and when of having difficult conversations. So making those difficult conversations a little bit easier for us by putting a little bit of sort of pre-thought and planning into them. So I'll share a link to that now, and thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks so much, Lynda.
That's great, thank you.
I personally really enjoyed that as well. I got a lot out of it.
Thanks, Beck.
And thanks for everyone for joining us. It was great to see you all.